You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 2nd of December 2024 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. Coming up on today's programme...
We want to attract American investment to Angola to help boost our economy, and we want to open the doors of the American market to Angolan investors.
Angola's president on the upcoming visit by US President Joe Biden as he finally fulfills his promise to visit Africa before the end of his term. But does this come too late to prevent China's dominance of the region? Taiwan's president is also on tour, and he too is annoying Beijing. We'll hear about Ching-te's visit to Hawaii and how the military ties with the US may change under a new administration. A man who's been convicted and jailed on multiple counts of tax evasion, campaign finance violations and witness tampering has been named as Donald Trump's pick as US ambassador to France. We'll ask just who Charles Kushner is and get the reaction from Paris. Bloomberg's Ewan Potts will bring us the latest business news, and we'll look ahead to the Fashion Awards taking place in London tonight. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Georgina Godwin. US President Joe Biden is on a two-day trip to Luanda, Angola, his first official visit to sub-Saharan Africa. He's there to fulfill a pledge he made to visit the continent during his presidency, increase bilateral ties as part of his Build Back Better World initiative, and to advance the Lobito Corridor project. Well, to unpack the significance of this trip, I'm joined on the line by José Miguel Cerdeira, who's the chief economist at BFA, Angola's second largest bank. Jose, thanks very much for coming on the programme. What is the Lobito Corridor project?
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a really pleasure to be here with you, Georgina. So the Lobito Corridor is, on its essence, really a railway line and all it goes with it. But really, the main part is a railway line between Lobito, like on the second or third city in Luanda, until the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. It goes through the whole of Angola and reaches Kolwezi, which is the DRC region where where a lot of copper is exported from.
So this would be to move minerals through Africa?
Yeah, really. That is the real main benefit of the line for now. So the main people benefiting from this line would be right now the copper producers in the region of Kolwezi, where transport times are now dropping from alternative lines, which can take up to a month to get the product to sea, until now to Lobito it takes over 5 days, and should even take less with improvements on the line which are already being made.
So this comes under the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, or the PGII. That's a rebrand of Biden's Build Back Better World initiative. Which nations are involved and who's funding it?
So the funding comes from various sources. This is more of a big branding move to pull various sources of funding to these projects. So, for example, in the Lobito Corridor line, the concessionaire itself, the Lobito Atlantic Railway Company, has already funding earmarked from both the Development Finance Corporation, which is the American Development Finance Institution, for about $550 million, and the Development Bank of Southern Africa, so $200 million from this South African institution. But also there's EU money already, not completely earmarked, but coming that way. And so this is a way of just pulling efforts from various institutions around the world. But who's really leading the way is the US.
So Angola's long nurtured close ties with China and Russia. Why is it now moving closer to the West?
Well, one of the reasons is just diversifying interests. Let's say that Angola for a long time, its only option, or at least right after the Civil War, its only option was really to go with, for example, Chinese financing, because other financing institutions put conditions that the Angolans were not really ready to meet. But right now they have more alternatives and they want to pursue that. And another thing is that Angolan authorities and Angolan population has also become somewhat skeptic of Chinese financing in some issues, such as sometimes the quality of supplying and also just, for example, they had a lot of significant amount of loans that were issued with collateral of oil exports, and that put a lot of pressure to the management of Angola's finances. So this is an opportunity to come away from it. When it comes to Russia, Russia really, as of the late few years, its support wasn't really very material. Its presence was really felt on the diamond side, and really now recent news is that even on the diamond side, its participation in one of the very most important companies, which is Katoka, has been sold to an Oman company, just because the sanctions are taking effect and making it more difficult to sell diamonds from these companies because of the Russian interests.
So that this trip comes in the twilight of Biden's term. I mean, he's just squeaking it in before he leaves. What does it tell us about the urgency and scope of US attention to the region? I mean, we know that many of his pledges on Africa remain unfulfilled.
Well, I'm not sure that I can speak to the whole of the African strategy of the US interests, but I would say the following. This is, in my opinion, a feat of the Angolan diplomacy to make Biden still come after a postponement to the hurricane and after the outcome of the election. I think the only bright spot of this, because it's really not the best of timings to come when after the election, is that the interests might even align also with the Trump presidency, because this is really a way of the US saying to China that it also wants to be present in Africa, and it doesn't really want to leave all of the playing field just for China.
And are there indications from the incoming Trump administration that there would be continuity?
Well, that's the big question right now. It would make sense because it plays really into the whole Trump strategy of confrontation with China and making America relevant. But really, it's up in the air to see if the new American administration will see the interest in this initiative. Although we would say that the brunt of support, well, it's signed in MOUs and documents like that. So I'm not really sure even that the issue is relevant or present in the media enough for the US administration to make a point of reversing course.
Jose, thank you very much indeed. That was Jose Miguel Cerdeira, the chief economist at BFA. Now, here's Monocle's Carlotta Rebello with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Georgina. US President Joe Biden has officially pardoned his son, Hunter Biden, despite previously ruling out a pardon or commutation. Hunter Biden had been convicted of gun charges and pleaded guilty to federal tax evasion. In a statement, President Biden said it was clear that Hunter was treated differently by prosecutors and had been singled out for political reasons. Reacting to the pardon, President-elect Donald Trump called the move a miscarriage of justice. In Georgia, political unrest continues as people took to the streets for the fourth night in a row to protest the government's decision to suspend accession talks with the European Union. The move has also sparked a string of public resignations, and the Coalition for Change, the country's largest opposition party, said that one of its leaders had been arrested by the police. Georgia's Prime Minister has ruled out calling a fresh election. And Saudi Arabia's long-awaited metro has partially reopened this weekend in Riyadh. The first 3 lines, which includes a link to the capital's main airport, opened to the public this Sunday, with the rest of the lines set to open by January 5th. It comes as the kingdom continues its efforts to alleviate the heavy traffic congestion and modernize Riyadh. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Georgina.
Thank you, Carlotta. This weekend, Taiwan's president, Ching-te, was in Hawaii on the first stop in what's an almost week-long sweep through the region, which will also take him to the US territory of Guam and to the Marshall Islands, Tuvalu and Palau, the only Pacific island nations among the 12 countries that recognise Taiwan's independence. China's foreign ministry said it strongly condemned US's support for Lai's visit and has lodged a complaint with Washington. It's also denounced a newly announced US weapons sale to Taiwan, a self-governing island that China claims as its own territory. Well, let's cross over to Taipei now, where the journalist William Yang is joining us. William, what's the purpose of this visit by Lai?
I believe this trip serves two purposes. I think the first purpose is definitely for Taiwan to have an opportunity, for him to actually have an opportunity to reiterate and respond to some of the criticisms that the Trump administration team basically has lodged against Taiwan during the campaign. So he actually made some comments about some of the criticisms, including Taiwan not spending enough on its defense, and at the same time, the comments about Taiwan stealing the semiconductor technologies from the U.S. But at the same time, I think it's important for Taiwan to deepen its engagement with these three Pacific allies. I think one of the reasons is obviously because the number of countries around the world that are recognizing Taiwan is now down to 12, and a lot of the countries are concentrating in the Pacific region. But at the same time, these three countries play a very important role in the U.S. Indo-Pacific defense policy. So this is also an important role for Taiwan to continue to make sure that it is involved in the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy. So I think these are definitely very important stops for Taiwan to showcase that it is willing and it has a role to play to continue to uphold the U.S. interests in the Indo-Pacific region.
Tell us more about China's reaction to this visit.
So the Chinese government has always been very, very against the U.S. having any favorable treatment to Taiwan. And every time that a Taiwanese official, especially the president, gets an approval to make a stopover on U.S. territories, the Chinese will always be reacting very angrily. And since Lai took office in May, they have increased the level of their anger and also their protest against his government. They have lodged already 2 military exercises around Taiwan since May, and there's a likelihood that they are possibly going to again stage another military exercise around Taiwan by the end of the week as a response to his trip to the Pacific. So I think basically, again, we are seeing China constantly issuing statements opposing the U.S. interacting with Taiwan. And the timing of the Biden administration announced the latest round of arms sales to Taiwan basically, again, highlights the fact that the U.S. is identifying and recognizing the importance of Taiwan in the Pacific region. And at the same time, they hope to send a signal to the incoming administration to hopefully continue this policy and practice.
Just on that weapons sale, it was announced on Friday. What are the details of that?
The details of that is basically some minor support and also parts in the fighter jets that Taiwan has already purchased from the U.S. So it's not really the major items that will clearly force China to have a more visible reaction. But of course, like I've already just mentioned, because of the fact that the Beijing sees Lai Ching-te as more of a threat to the possibility of a peaceful unification between Taiwan and China. So they have really stepped up their rhetorics against anything, any favorable policies that the U.S. is extending to his government. So usually in the past, we wouldn't see such a strongly worded statement coming from Beijing in response to this kind of military sales. But because it is, again, coming as a gesture to his government and to him, and so I think Beijing sees that as crossing the red line. And that's why they are basically issuing such a statement. And I think we will have to see whether the Trump administration will continue the same frequency of arms sales to Taiwan or not once he takes office in January.
Because, of course, the US is obligated to help the island defend itself under the Taiwan Relations Act. But it does maintain a position of strategic ambiguity over whether it would get involved if Taiwan were to be invaded by China. Trump hasn't made his position clear on this, really, has he at all?
Right. I think on the campaign trail, he has been dodging answering such a question in a very direct way. But if we look at some of the cabinet members that he has picked in charge of foreign policy and national security, maybe that could give us, especially the people here in Taiwan, some, I think, sigh of relief that the continuity of this more and more clear U.S. commitment to militarily defend Taiwan if China launches an attack against the island will be continued under his administration. But of course, I think there is still a lot of uncertainty, and we really don't know how long these cabinet picks might be able to stay in his administration if we look at the frequency of turnover during his first term. And usually, I think the initial group of the cabinet members didn't really last that long in his last administration. And I think this time around, loyalty has been prioritized so much when he was picking people. So if anyone falls out of favor with him, they could be replaced very easily. And so I think there's definitely a level of uncertainty here in Taiwan, especially within the government right now, regarding what kind of signal they will be getting from the incoming Trump administration.
William, thank you very much indeed. William Yang in Taipei there. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Well, staying with Trump picks, the US president-elect has nominated real estate developer, pardoned felon and family connection Charles Kushner as US ambassador to France. Previous holders of the post included Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson. Let's get more on this story now with Simon Bouvier, Monocle's Paris bureau chief. Simon, hello to you.
Bonjour, Georgina. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. But who exactly then is Charles Kushner?
Well, he's the father of President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and he is best known for having been pardoned by President Trump right before President Trump left office. He previously served 2 years in federal prison for a tax evasion scheme that is the details of which are a bit murky, but most famously he hired a prostitute to seduce his brother-in-law and then send the tapes to his sister. That's the kind of best-known details of that whole sordid affair. Generally, suffice to say, apart from the fact that he doesn't speak French, the French kind of establishment is not very pleased with this choice, but they're going to have to live with it.
Well, tell us more about that reaction. What's been said?
Well, I think in general, this particular post of U.S. ambassador in Paris has traditionally gone to top campaign donors. So it is an important one diplomatically, but it is also one that U.S. presidents in the past have given to people who were big spenders on their political campaigns to thank them. And this time is no different. Charles Kushner reportedly financed Donald Trump's first campaign to the height of $1 million in various donations. And though the numbers are not quite known yet for this most recent campaign, it's a good bet that he was also one of his top financial backers. So that's the logic there. And again, I suppose since he's a close kind of family member of the president, the French authorities can console themselves knowing that at least he has a direct line to the president.
And has there been any official political comment from leaders in France about this?
Not quite yet, but I think, my guess, Georgina, is that they know how Trump works, and they know that loyalty and kind of family connections could be helpful to them. Having somebody who has this direct contact, as I was saying earlier, to the White House might actually be an asset, in spite of the fact that he does not seem on paper to be the most qualified for this particular position. But beggars can't be choosers, and they know that it's going to be tough for them in this second Trump term because they're not in a great spot right now. The French and the Europeans in general.
I mean, how did Macron deal with Trump the first time around, and has the relationship between France and the US changed in the interim?
I think Macron tried to take a kind of more personal approach. His read on Donald Trump was that he was quite transactional, and that kind of man-to-man relationships was something that could get you far. And I don't think he was entirely wrong about that, but I don't think that it was that effective in bridging the kind of policy gaps, or should we call them policy abysses, between France and the U.S. on a variety of things, including the Iran nuclear deal, for example. He tried to persuade Trump not to withdraw from it, but he did. Same with the Paris Climate Accords. And now it's expected that their disagreements over how to handle the war in Ukraine after Russia's invasion is going to be complicated for him to solve just by being chummy with the president.
Simon, thank you very much indeed. That's Simon Bouvier in Paris. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Now let's get a roundup of some of the day's business stories with Ewan Potts from Bloomberg. Ewan, welcome back. The US stock market has been in buoyant form since Donald Trump's election, but the president-elect's threats on tariffs are still a worry for investors. Tell us more.
Hello, Georgina. Yeah, it's been a bumper year for US stocks, but the S&P 500 actually saw its best month in November after the election of Donald Trump. Investors quite excited about what the new president could mean for companies in the US. But one of the things they're really not keen on is tariffs. We've heard Trump saying many, many times how keen he is to impose tariffs. During the course of the election campaign, he suggested he could put a 60% tariff on imports from China, and perhaps a tariff of 10% or even 20% on goods coming from everywhere else. So, of course, if those things happen, we will be embroiled in a full-scale global trade war, and that is not seen as a positive for markets. Well, interestingly, Bloomberg Economics have been mapping out some of the plausible scenarios for what lies ahead. Now, a lot of this is, to be frank, guesswork. They've been speaking to officials who helped to deliver Trump's first-term trade policies and trying to understand how the battle plans were constructed and an assessment of the political and economic realities. The truth is, nobody quite knows what these tariffs are going to look like, but Bloomberg Economics have been attempting to map out how it might look once Donald Trump takes the White House in January. Now, the base case from Bloomberg Economics is that there will be 3 waves of tariff hikes starting in the summer of next year, with levies on China ultimately tripling by the end of 2026, and a small hike on the rest of the world. That would focus on intermediate and capital goods that don't directly impact consumer prices. Now, the combined impact of all of that will be a tripling of the average US tariffs to almost 8% by the end of 2026. That is their base case. And if that's how things play out, then US imports and exports of goods could potentially drop from 21% of global trade today to 18%. Now, that may not sound like a big drop, but that is pretty significant, involving many, many billions of dollars. And it would lead, of course, to a plunge in trade between the US and China. US has already been decoupling somewhat from the Chinese economy. Mexico recently became the biggest trade partner of the US, overtaking China. So there's been a decline in trade with China over the last few years, but of course, it is still a hugely important trade relationship. And the results of those tariffs, as mapped out by Bloomberg Economics, is that US growth would take a hit, inflation would potentially increase as well, and it would also see bullish stock markets facing a pretty bearish hurdle to clear, and there's a chance of that affecting unemployment as well.
Now, here in Europe, companies and politicians are struggling to deal with rising numbers of workplace sick days. What's behind that?
Yeah, the average number of sick days across the OECD, which is a club of rich world countries, is 14 days a year, which already to my mind sounds like rather a lot. But in Portugal, that number is 26. In Finland, it's 27. And in Norway, top of the table, 28 days a year on average, people are off sick. Now, the question is, what is behind the rise in worklessness, work absences, I should say, and can anything be done about it? In Norway, critics blame an overly generous welfare system. The long-term sick get their full salary for a year, with a cap somewhat higher than the average wage. And then after a year, they get 2/3 of their former income. So a pretty generous system in Norway, which of course is a country with plenty of oil money sloshing around. But lavish benefits are far from the only cause. And the situation is worsening across the whole continent. Now, aging workforces and more awareness of stress and mental health, particularly among younger generations, are a key factor, as have been repercussions from the COVID pandemic. Businesses say that absences are exacerbating gaps in the labour market and hampering output. And for workers, of course, being out of work affects earnings and livelihoods, and further implications for well-being and sense of self-worth. Interestingly, in the UK, the number of economically inactive working age people has risen by almost 800,000 since early 2020. So that is almost 1 million people, or a long way towards 1 million people who are now no longer working, just compared to before the pandemic 5 years ago. Now, the UK government is aware of this problem, which is costing it a lot of money, and unveiled a plan last week to try and reverse that and get more people into work. And in Germany, employers spent a record 77 billion euros last year on employee sick leave. And in Germany, that's more than double 2010 levels. So getting people to reduce sick days is difficult. And interesting research from the OECD, which shows that people coming off work whilst still ill, so-called presenteeism, is actually more harmful to productivity than losses from those staying away. It reckons actually the losses are 2 to 3 times. So it is a big problem right across Europe, and nobody is really quite sure how to tackle it.
Ewan, thank you very much indeed. That was Bloomberg's Ewan Potts. Now, the Fashion Awards, the annual fundraising event hosted by the British Fashion Council, will be held this evening at the Royal Albert Hall, attended by international celebrities and designers. Well, I'm joined now by Natalie Teodosi, who's Monocle's fashion director. Natalie, I'm pleased to say you're looking extremely well. No sick days here.
No sick days. That wouldn't be the day to get sick.
Absolutely not, because it really is a huge event. How is it perceived? I mean, it's more than just a little local London thing.
Exactly. It did start as a London event. It was called the British Fashion Awards, but thanks to Natalie Massenet, who is also the founder of Net-a-Porter, she was chairman of the British Fashion Council, and she really rebranded it into a very big global celebration called the Fashion Awards. So you get designers flying in, all the big brands are involved. And like you mentioned, it's a big fundraiser, but it's also a really great opportunity for the fashion and luxury industry, I think, to get together at the end of the year to celebrate. But at the same time, it's also an opportunity for conversation and also sometimes to address the challenges that we faced through the year and hope for the best for the next year.
Now, of course, lots of awards will be given out tonight. What's the most prestigious and who's in the frame for that?
So Tom Ford is the man of the night. He will be given a special recognition award for everything that he has done in the fashion industry. And it's really interesting because he thinks that this award marks sort of the end of his career in fashion. He has just sold his company a few years ago to Estee Lauder for over $2 billion, and he is off to make movies and start a whole new chapter. So it will be really interesting to see him, to interview him. We will be backstage interviewing the winners and just see what he has to say about starting this fresh chapter.
It's so exciting and interesting. He says he's here in London for his son. He wants his son to have a British education, which I thought was very interesting. Who is likely to win Designer of the Year?
So it's tough to say. We still don't know, and I think no one will know until that tonight. But there's a really really great runners-up. Miuccia Prada, Jonathan Anderson, who has been behind the success of Loewe and his own brand, which is London-based J.W. Anderson. There's Shemena Kamali, who has just revived the House of Chloe. And I couldn't make a prediction, to be fully honest, but I think all the nominees are really great, and it's going to be stiff competition.
Now, you're there, of course, tonight, covering the event for us. You're the presenter of our new programme, Monocle on Fashion. Tell us what we can expect.
Exactly. So I will be there with our producer, Lily, in the press room. So we will be interviewing the winners as they come out. And we will share some of those clips and some of those interviews in a bonus episode for Monocle on Fashion tomorrow, just to kind of give you a sense of what the evening was like and what all the winners, from Tom Ford to who else is getting an Sofia Neofitu Apostolou, a great British media editor, will also be getting a special recognition award. Remo Ruffini from Moncler. So you'll be able to hear snippets of those conversations on Monocle on Fashion tomorrow.
Excellent. Well, have fun tonight. I'm quite sure you will. Natalie Teodosi, thank you very much indeed. And that's all for this edition of The Briefing, which was produced by Carlotta Rabello. Our researchers were Maisie Ringer and Gunnar Grinlid, and our studio manager was Flynn Simons. And The Briefing is back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Georgina Godwin. Goodbye and thanks for listening.